be the moderator for the panel today. I'm delighted to see a full room. We had a start last night where we were asked as audience to give an idea of who we were and why we were here. And like any other good writer or speaker, I also think it's a great idea for us to know who our audience is. The response to the phone, which I couldn't do on my phone, I don't know about you, showed that only about 10 or 12% of the people at this conference have actually written or published 4 or more books. That the majority of the people here are thinking about it or somewhere in the process. So I would just be interested in knowing in this room, since we're talking about how do you start and how do you get done, how many people here have actually written a book and had it published? Okay, we got about 3 out of the game. How many are currently working on a manuscript? Almost everybody. That's great. Okay. And how many have an idea but really haven't started writing? All right. Well, this should inform some of the answers of the great panel that we have here today. One day I was having lunch with Ginny Fite, responding to some of her questions about some incidents in my past. And I remember it. It's true. You need to make that story into a book, she explained. For example, what would the book be? I said to her. She then proceeded to spontaneously roll out the plot of a novel she suggested that I could write based on my own experience. It's too bad lunchtime was over and we had to leave, because if we had had more time, she probably could have completed the outline. All I would have had to do was fill in the blanks. Both of our panelists today have demonstrated their ability to not just think about a book idea, not just jot down a few notes to return to at a later point in life, not just to start writing and get too distracted by other things to finish. Both panelists have not only started writing books, they have not only finished writing them, they have not only been published, but have written several books each in different genres. I am impressed. A former federal immigration judge and lawyer, Paul Grussendorf's book, My Trials Inside America's Deportation Factories, addresses an important current policy issue, deportation of immigrants. His personal experience in the field has also led him to author noir novels based on his knowledge and experience with the immigrant community. So I asked Paul if he had any current projects lined up and what he plans to finish. He said, quote, 1 mystery book, 1 multicultural adventure, and 1 music memoir. Ginny Fite just finished proofreading her 5th novel, which comes out this month. Writing novels has not stopped her from adventuring into and being published in other genres too. Thrillers, paranormal mystery, fantasy, poems, women's fiction, and a collection of humorous essays on aging. Describing her prolific production, she confided to me, I suppose this means I'm a little obsessed. Is it obsession? Is it discipline? Is it imagination? How do people like this, authors like this, do it? The purpose of this panel is to provide some answers to a series of questions about how to both start and complete your book. Our panelists will be providing answers from their own experience. If you have a burning question during the presentation, please let us know. But keep in mind, we're going to plan on a 20-minute question period at the end. So let's start with the first question. I've actually combined 2 questions that I gave you into one here. Why did you want to write a book, and where do you get the ideas for those books? Ginny, why don't you start this?
Do I get a vowel for this?
Of course. You know, we've got mics. If we need them, let us know. Or Ginny, would you like to use the mic?
Not unless, can you hear me back there?
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
so I don't think there was a time that I didn't believe I wouldn't write, and that's kind of complicated completed awful sentence, so ignore that. Erase that one. I was always going to write. The question was, what would it be about? I think that's always the question, right? How do you focus in on the one thing? There are a zillion things running around in your mind all of the time. My mind constantly chatters at me. Yours does also. I know you know this, but just in case, just as a test, just close your eyes and blurt out loud whatever your mind is saying to you right now. I totally would think she said, right? Okay.
Chores!
So all of this stuff is going on in your mind all the time. And I think the difference between writers and non-writers is that writers tune in from time to time. For me, that's always how a story starts. For whatever reason, at that moment, I tune in to that particular chatter, and I just start writing down what it says. For me, it is as if someone is telling me a story. I'm sitting there minding my own business, and this very intrusive person is insisting on telling me a story. That's always how it starts. If I'm lucky, it comes with a whole scene. I see the entire movie unraveling in front of my eyes. Frankly, I have no idea what the story is about at this time. The notion that Lawrence talked about, that I would start with the theme, seems so foreign to me. I might find the theme by the time I finish a book. But when I begin with what is in front of me, what I see happening in my head. And that is how everything starts for me, whether it's a poem or an essay, or a blog post, or a short story, or a novel. They all begin like that.
Paul, why do you want to write books, and how do you get your ideas?
Well, it's kind of a long story because when I went to college, I was convinced I was going to be a writer because I couldn't think of anything else to do. So why not write about things in society? But then I took a detour and I got into a film production career, and I spent a decade in film production, first in the States and then in Germany, and I kind of got the attitude that literature is dead. Film is the world now. The modern world is film. And so it was only when I returned to the States and went to law school that I got interested in writing again. I don't recommend that people go to law school in order to start writing, but there is so much writing and so much of it tedious in law school but my hands started doing this, and over and over and over, and eventually the idea of writing came back to me, and then naturally all of my writing, both nonfiction and fiction, has somehow been related to my legal career. When I then started, after law school, when I started writing stories, short stories, which just topics that appeared from my work, and I started submitting to different literary journals, both college and other literary journals. After I had published about half a dozen short stories, then at the same time I had been playing in Washington, D.C. I had been playing saxophone in a Latin band, a salsa cumbia band, and you wouldn't believe how many Latin clubs there are all around the D.C. area. But I had been playing for a few years while I was practicing law and actually running into some of the same people in the clubs that I either sometimes represented or encountered in my legal career. At some point, it just hit me. I said, wait a minute, this is such a colorful, interesting environment that most people have never experienced. Wouldn't it be fun to set a murder mystery in these Latino clubs? And that's how that first idea was born. But so the short answer, I think, to your question, how do we decide upon an idea? The idea comes to us.
I think one of the hardest things that people face, especially if you're not writing every day as part of your job, is once you've gotten started, how do you get finished? Is there a system? Are you writing every morning? Are you setting deadlines for yourself? so let's hear from our panelists about how they actually organize themselves to write. Have they got whiteboards, blackboards, plot themes on boards, get up at 5 o'clock every morning and work until they go to work? Let's start with Paul on this one.
Well, there's a quote from Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland, that I've always loved. I think it's the character, the king, at some point, for whatever reason, he says, you start at the beginning, and when you get to the end, stop. And I've always loved that quote. In fact, when I was an immigration judge, there were so many times I would have lawyers in front of me floundering to try to get their client's story out. And I would say, counsel, just start at the beginning, and when you get to the end, stop. Now, unfortunately, that's not really the way that it usually works when we're writing a book, but I still like to take that principle and see how far I can run with it. In other words, when I start a project, it's usually after a lot of just kind of either subconscious or back of the mind, thinking about it, pondering about it, and at some point I get so worked up about this particular idea or concept, okay, stop, it's time now to, I'm going to do this project, this is going to take years out of my life, so it's time to get started. And what I like to do, rather than sitting down and spending months with a detailed outline or whatever, I like to start running. I like to find a place to write and kind of just as much, at least at the beginning of the story, and this is where the fun and the excitement and the passion for the project comes. Just run as far as I can, and then when you, ultimately you will run up against a wall or a trip or whatever, and then maybe it's time to take a step back and to start, for my way of working, to start outlining and thinking about it in a more organized approach. So actually, the first book, the first fiction book, I didn't do any outlining at all. And the immigration judge memoir, at first I didn't do, when I had the idea, okay, I just retired as an immigration judge. Most people don't know anything about immigration court or about the immigration system. So I'm going to write about my experiences inside the immigration court over the past number of years. Well, I don't need an outline for that. I could just start at the beginning and when I get to the end, stop. But then after I worked on that for a while, I decided, actually, this is a much larger topic and in my own experience than just having been in immigration court. I have a whole life of experience working with immigrants and with the immigration system before I became a judge. So then I decided to expand the memoir, and then I did do more of a formal outline. And believe me, I read all the books about writing and how do you outline your book, and all of the writing magazines, tips on doing outlining, and I tried a lot of those different techniques, but I still find that I like to get into a project for the fun of it before I then sit down and step back from the thicket to look at the larger picture and outline. And of course, especially for fiction, I think the outlining is important just for the dramatic arc of the story, to know where you are, where you're going, and where you're going to end up, and to have that in front of you before you invest too much time in the project.
Ginny?
I sort of follow what Paul is talking about. I do think my brain works on a story before it starts talking to me, this little set of friends I have up here. So I don't worry too much about planning at the beginning, and like Paul, I jump in. When I start hearing that story being told to me, I'm writing as fast as I can, as fast as my fingers will go on the keyboard. And I will go also as far as I can, for as long as I can, without stopping to think about what is happening here. Because I think all of the juice, all of the energy is in that that you really have to get off that block at the beginning with as much force as you can, because it's a very long journey that you don't ever remember when you're starting again. But you need that power at the beginning. I pretty much work every day unless something like this happens to interrupt me. I work in the morning in general, but I'm not a soldier about it. I do read my email. From time to time, I will dip into Facebook. And I know that I am taking myself off course, but I have now accepted that all of these things that interrupt the process are actually part of the process. We all are, continually feeding our brains stuff. Whether we're feeding our brains nutritious stuff or not, that's up to us. But stuff goes in, and the stuff that goes in becomes words on the page, somewhere down the line. We will see something, read something. I accept that everything that shows up while I am writing a novel is somehow important for me to consider somewhere in the process of this novel. So, and I don't know why this happens, but it always happens. If I am writing a thriller about rogue government murderers, all of a sudden I start seeing actual news stories about things related to that. They're not front page stories, but they are stories that somehow drift my way. And I copied the entire thing, including the dateline and who wrote it, into a folder that says research. Because somehow I know that whatever that is, it is important to my story because it showed up at the time. So that's part of my process, and I have just accepted. And I just realized that Beto O'Rourke and I have the same talking style. Use our hands to propel us out into the world. So I write every day. If I feel like there's no word coming, which is not common but happens, I go back to the very beginning of what I wrote and I read again what I wrote. And there's some adjusting and tinkering and line editing that I might do, or maybe I see that something is missing and I will add that. But mostly I'm going back to find that source for that story again. This gets harder when you get to about page 100, because it's a lot to read in the morning before you start to work. So then I'll just go back a chapter or two to see what was going on before this, where was I going. But at some point, as Paul said, I hit the wall of too much is out there. I have too many threads, too many characters, too many small stories developing that are supposed to come together somehow. So I have a variety of crutches I give myself. I write a spreadsheet. I create a spreadsheet with the timeline for each character. What is happening to this character at this time, with dates, so that I don't get lost. One under the other, so that I can see where these events intersect in their particular story. I write columns of things I know about the characters so that they stay true to who they are. I write down things that will never be in the book, like when they met, what she was wearing when they met. That might show up, actually, particularly if it's shoes. So everything that occurs to me goes somewhere in a file, in a Word file somewhere that I can find later if I need it, but not everything, as Lauren said, goes in the book. I don't need to put everything in the book, but I do need to know it. So as it arrives, I gather it together. So my folder for a novel includes a research file, a background file. It can include maps. It can include pictures of a locale where I have never been, but where this character is going to go or comes from. Even if no detail about the character shows up in the story, I know what his neighborhood looked like, what kind of house he grew up in, whether his grandmother wears chartreuse or not. And all of those things become part of this story, even if a reader never sees it. So all of this is happening all at once. Sometimes I write down in a list the scenes as I already have them. plus the scenes I think I need to have in order to get through the story. But I get bored with that, somewhere around 12. And that's probably just me, because I know that there are big, wonderful novel schemes out there that tell you to put what happens, one sentence, one phrase, for each of your scenes on a little card and put it up on a board. That is way too much like kindergarten for me. I can't do it. But maybe in my head it happens. So somewhere around halfway in the book, I know what the end will be. And sometimes I cheat and write the end. Whenever it is, I know it. Because that's the scene I'm driving toward. If I'm, yes,
There's a fundamental screenwriting book, I forget the title of it right now, that says you should have an ending and work backwards from it. When they're doing screenplays, they taught them that apparently in class, you know.
it's not a bad idea.
Have the ending first. I think it may depend on what kind of material you're writing though. If you have a big bang ending, then your story, you know, justifies what happens in that big ending.
Yes, I think absolutely you could do that. For me, that would be a little too formulaic. What I discover is that the ending arrives, just like the beginning arrived. The ending arrives in my mind. And I will even jot down, this is what is going to happen, you know, so-and-so is the real killer. Because I might not have known it before. And I've written a book where I got to the end and wrote the end, and I thought, nope, that's wrong. This is not the right killer. And I had to go back up about 100 pages so that I could move us to where the right killer would eventually be revealed. And I think it's important to have that moment where you know it. I'm not so sure you know it at the very beginning. And I think, for me anyway, if I wrote the end first and then wrote toward the end, it would feel like I was confined. That I wasn't going to find the things I needed to find in the story. Because ultimately, I think no matter what the genre looks like, I am somehow always writing about what I'm looking for. A personal journey.
Let's do a quick follow-up question to that question. Each of you has several projects currently in the mill. How do you do that? How do you decide what you're working on each day? Can you keep 3 or 4 different projects,
Multiple
especially very
personalities.
I was really shocked to hear that you write the ending before you finish your book. But I want to answer your question, but I want to wrap up one other point about the prior question about the daily routine of writing.
Sure.
And most of my writing would happen after work. So I would need to have a place to go to write. And we all need to find a place that's comfortable where we can feel, all right, this is the best ideal situation for me that I can manage under the circumstances to be comfortable and uninterrupted to write. But I don't think, and I would never be comfortable myself, just being in a room with no windows, with nothing, just in like a blank slate type situation. And I discovered, actually from the process of studying for the bar exam, that I don't like to be completely isolated when I'm being creative. That I like to actually be in kind of a public space where there's a little bit of kind of like background chatter, such as a coffee shop or a restaurant on a corner where there's traffic going by in both directions. But I know the people there, I can kind of impose upon them to be in my own corner. And so I would always find a place after work where I could spend a couple hours just, if a little bit of distraction is good for me, I found. Now, others won't appreciate that, but so I don't think that everybody needs to feel, well, I have to lock myself away from my family and I need a special place to write. I just wanted to address that. So how to juggle different projects at the same time, I don't have the slightest idea. Well, I do have, for example, about 3 different projects, and a lot of it, again, probably nobody in this room, and myself included, is dependent upon our writing to survive. And that's a good thing, because that gives us the luxury of kind of, in a way, being driven by our interest. And one day, well, let's see, I still have this dangling thing over here that I need to finish off on this particular manuscript, but I really have an urge now to turn to fill in the background on this particular point. So we can do that after you become comfortable with the writing process. You can have the luxury, if you don't have a publication deadline, to kind of mix and choose and match as your will and your interest drives you and finds you.
Ginny, how do you juggle them all at once?
I actually don't think of it as juggling. There's a lot of hours in the day, and I could never think of one thing straight through for 8 hours. So it seems natural to me if you lived in the world of work, where other people are essentially assigning you. So I spent many years in journalism, where you're not working on a single story in a day. You may make calls or go to an event or interview somebody on 3 different stories in the same day. And so that sort of became comfortable for me, holding all of that. You know, that's what those notepads are for. You have 5 stories going in your notepad at once. So you have 5 notepads, depending on the size of the story you're covering. And you just get accustomed to flipping your mind to this next subject. And it is true, you know, if I were stopped on the street by somebody who I had previously interviewed that day 4 people ago, I might not actually remember what they said to me, but it would be in my notebook. That's probably where the habit of keeping everything that comes at me comes from, is that experience. But also, I think maybe it's the way your mind is organized, and I suspect there are many different types of minds that operate differently. Mine can focus intently for 4 hours or so on one thing, but after that, pretty much useless on that particular subject. So it's natural for me to drift into something else that enlivens it again. Maybe these are different parts of my brain that are operating. That's possible. Maybe there's a little alarm clock in there that says, wake up, wake up. But if you've done any other kind of art, I think you'll see this is true. So if you paint, the likelihood is that you're not painting on one canvas. Maybe you fell in love with Prussian blue, and all of a sudden you find that you have 6 canvases set up around your house with pieces of Prussian blue on them because the feeling of that color just so met you where you were that you had to keep putting it down somewhere. So I think that might be normal in the artistic process, that you just express yourself in many different ways, not simultaneously, but within, say, the first 16 hours of being awake.
Yes.
When you're expressing yourself that way, are you using, you said you're using notepads, are you all guys also using a software system? Like in your
I use Word.
Pardon me?
I use Microsoft Word
Yeah.
to write with on the computer. On my iPad, I use whatever it is that they offer, notes, pages, whatever they've got there. But publishers and most self-publishing platforms want a Word document that is either in Word or can be converted to PDF. So I'm not a big fan of investing in an expensive app.
Let me just say that there are other sessions in this conference where
I
we
saw
talk
that, I
about
wanted to linger
resources,
too long on that, I got
where you can buy the software that will help you with your plot
Yep.
and keeping track of your characters. Let me also say that as a journalist, I found that the thing that makes my writing schedule happen is realizing when I'm spent. You know, I will work on something for a certain amount of time, and at some point have to acknowledge I am spinning my wheels, put it away and go on to the next thing for the day.
Question?
Yeah,
The only reason I'm in here actually is this, I'm trying to figure out what to do about writer's block. I've written over 1 million words of fiction, and I'm working on a trilogy. 1 million words of fiction is mostly fan fiction, and that's already up and done with, well, most of it. But I came to a point where I just have trouble writing anything.
well, let's ask, do you ever get writer's block?
No.
I never did. I used to be like, what's this writer's block? It came out like water, and then at some point it just went poof.
And it doesn't help to go on to a different project.
Well, when I start to go on to, like, trying to work on a project, I end up just sitting, editing the document over and over and polishing, which is really good for the polishing, but I don't really have anything to put in there that's useful, and if I force myself, I end up just taking it back out because it isn't anything.
I recommend non-word work.
Yes.
So paint, or do movement, or sing without words, something that does not have words in it. There's something deep that you have to get to. I mean, there are some forms of therapy that are really useful for loosening, you know.
It's funny when you were talking about multiple projects. When I used to work on like 4 or 5 different stories at a time, and there were a lot of people like, oh, we want you to finish this story, so just focus on the story. And I kept starting new stories until I had like 10 of them. And I kept feeling bad about that. And that's when it started drying up. As long as I was starting a new story, I think the other stories were not giving me any trouble. I don't know, you know, I think there's a value to writing lots and lots of random stuff.
There was a period in my life when I was not writing very much, at least by my standard. I was writing poetry. The poems are a different experience for me.
Yeah, I write poetry, that's
Right, so I was painting a lot. And I painted in the same way that I write. I painted whatever came up, whatever I saw in my head. And I wasn't painting to be a great painter. I was painting to just put color on a canvas somewhere. And I think that helps enormously. And you don't even need a class. Just go buy canvas and paints and start squirting.
I agree completely. I was just going to add other activities and/or adventures. When I say adventures, what comes to mind is travel. You just came back from San Miguel de Allende, and I find when I travel to a really interesting place, then sometimes an avalanche of ideas just come to me. And I highly recommend travel.
Okay, let's try another one here. What has been your approach to finding an agent and/or a publisher? And if you self-published, why did you do it, and how did it go? Paul?
Well, this is where the discussion turns dark. Well, my first, what I call Latino noir, which was called Latex Monkey with Banana, and it's about the saxophone player in the Hispanic clubs in the Washington, D.C. area. I actually found a very well-situated agent in Washington by sending out queries, and then I was invited to come and meet with her, and I met with her and her assistant, and I was the happiest person in the world while they were sitting there contemplating which publisher is going to pick this up, and thinking about movies, spin-offs, and all this. So they, of course, they sent out to all the traditional mystery publishers. Valentine, there was an editor at Valentine who was really excited, but then you learned that in a publishing house, no book gets picked up by a single editor, it's always by a committee. And the committee shot down the book, And then this particular agent, as I'm sure with most agents, after they've expended a certain amount of energy on traditional publishing, then they don't see any continuing return for them, is that they're going to turn. So I would continue on my own, all of the independent publishers and et cetera, et cetera. With my legal memoir, again, first I found an attorney agent in Washington, a very well-known, very well-situated person who he has an item every month in the DC Bar Journal, and he's an author's agent as well as an attorney. And when I met with him, he said, I guarantee you we can get this book published. You just have to cut out all the political stuff. And the book was dealing with immigration and refugees. The book is very polemical and very political, and so what's the point? Then, again, through constant queries to agents and so on, and this takes a long time, of course. I found a very well-situated agent in La Jolla, California, who was just certain that this is going to be a big hit. But after she sent out to all the traditional publishing houses and got rejected, then she had enough of it. And that's how it goes. And another thing to keep in mind that you may already have experienced is that usually when you're submitting either to an agent or to a publisher, you're submitting to a reader first. And so one of my mystery books, which is still not published, there is an independent publisher that pops up on all of the top 10 independent publishers that receive submissions unagented list in Seattle. And when I submitted the query and the first 50 pages, I received a response, oh, we'd really love to read the rest of your manuscript. And then I get a response, well, our reader says, this is 3 years ago now, our reader says, your bad guys are Russians, and nobody's interested in Russians anymore. Everybody's interested in Mideast terrorism. Is anybody interested in Russians now? And the other thing, the reader says that the bad guy is driving a Pontiac Firebird. And research shows that that car is from the 1960s. A bad guy wouldn't be driving such an old car. Well, anybody knows that a Pontiac Firebird is a classic muscle car that a bad guy would love to drive. So the book is shot down by the reader before it even gets to the main editor. And that's why then I ultimately turned to self-publishing, CreateSpace, and Amazon.
So you've done all your books self-publishing.
So far.
Ginny, what's your experience? Have you used an agent, gotten one, looked for one,
Yes.
self-published?
So I think that if you want to write a book, don't think about this part. If you want to publish a book, however, you do have to think about this part. I think of agents and editors and publishing houses and committees and marketing people as the very high gate that anyone who has completed a manuscript has to get through if they want their book out into the wider world. I hate all of them. So we'll just start from there. The first thing I published, I self-published the essays on getting older. At the time, I thought I was terribly old. I was 62. And it seemed like the end of the earth to me that I was 62. And now I realize I was young then. You know, when you still have sex, that's when you're young. So I was just writing the essays and sending them to my sister saying, what do you think, what do you think? And finally she said, you know, you really have to publish these. I said, oh, God, how do I do that? She said, well, I heard about these people called Lulu. Go look them up. So I do what my sister says. I go look up Lulu, and it looks doable. Like I could almost understand what they were going to do. And so I just engaged myself in that process, and after a while I hated them as well. But I now understand, you know, coming away from it from a long distance, I now understand what they were trying to get me to do. And they included an editor, a layout person, and all of that stuff. And they took my manuscript and my drawings, because they're all my stick drawings. They're very good about that. And for them, I had to submit those stick drawings separately as their own files. They put that together. I didn't create a file with all of that in it. And they made a book, and they put it up on Amazon, and et cetera, and, you know, I could buy a bundle of them, try to sell them to my friends and family. And my husband took them to work and said everybody had to buy one. And they're still selling, oddly enough. So they have an existence outside of me. They still exist in the world. And because it is that amazing print-on-demand technology, anybody wants one of them, they can get one now, which is kind of amazing because that's 12 years ago. So once I had done that, I thought, well, I have some short stories kicking around here that could be in a book. I have lots of poems that could be in a book. So I played with that for a while, and because I had this partner, Lulu, which it sounds now like Ingram Spark is trying to be that partner, that offered global distribution, so you know I could go find my book on Amazon Australia if I wanted to. I did that for a while, but then when I got
Are you
into
saying Hulu?
Lulu,
Lulu.
like
Oh, yeah.
little Lulu,
Okay.
L-U-L-U.
You have to pay them to do that?
Oh, yeah, it's like any vanity press, but it wasn't expensive at the time. I don't know if they're more expensive now. They might be. But also, I wasn't using, if you want to include color photos, like you're doing a travel book and you have color photos, that could get to be very expensive. But this was basically text and line drawings, and it's really not expensive to produce. Yes?
Yeah, when you were going through the publishing house editorial process, did you ever feel like you had to compromise what you
Yes.
created to what they wanted out of you?
Yes. So I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
So basically, done with the Lulu process, and a little discomfort with the editor when she questioned words I wanted to use. Maybe because I use words in the same way that my sons spell. They're very creative spellers. And my words tend to not look like the words you think might be there ordinarily. So I had a small tussle around that. But the novels, it seemed to me I needed to do this thing with an agent and a publishing house and all of that stuff. And I was a little concerned, so I had written what is usually the traditional autobiographical novel of my life as I knew it to that point, without knowing what the end would be, which now I know is just death. But I thought there might be an alternative to that. And I got some really beautiful rejections. That I didn't know that they were beautiful at the time because I didn't know what these looked like. But they were rejections, so I put that book away. The next book I worked on turned out to be the fourth book that got published. It took me a very long time to do, mostly because I wasn't sure of what was going to happen in it. I already told you what it's like. So it took me a long time, and I was working full time, and I had 5 kids, and they were getting married and having babies, so lots of stuff happening. But at the end of that, I thought, no, this does need an agent. I need a publishing house. So I started going to those workshops where they have agents and talking to agents and getting wonderful rejections. Just really, really good rejections. But also getting the idea that whatever it was I had said about my book wasn't coming across. And I think this is the thing. I don't know if anybody ever does it. If you see a class in how to write a query, take it. They're in abundance online, webinars. everybody's offering on how to write a query letter. This is the hardest thing that you will write. This letter, in 150 words, you have to sum up your whole 100,000 word book. You cannot write something that's harder than this except the synopsis, which is a one-page, single-spaced description of everything that happens in your book that's important. Those two things, they are the hardest things ever to write. And this is what an agent will look at. An agent will give you approximately 20 seconds. It will look at that first paragraph. Do not send them anything with typos, spelling errors, get their name right. I mean, just the basic things. But that 150 words of what your book is, that's going to be, they'll turn the page and look at the next thing, or they won't. And they'll send you some lovely form letter, wishing you well, where they know that someone, but not them, will represent your book. Okay, so I went through that process. Shelved that book. Wrote the next book. This time, I had a friend who had an agent. I asked, could I ask her agent if she would represent me? She said, oh, sure, I don't care. I don't like her, though, she said, but I didn't hear that part. So I wrote to her agent, didn't hear anything. 3 months passed, and because I was a newbie and didn't know I'm not supposed to talk to them, I sent her an email saying, hey, I sent you this email with all the stuff you asked for on your website, and I haven't heard back from you. Because, you know, that used to be okay to do in the world that I came from. She sends me back a nasty gram. I haven't looked at it yet. If you want to withdraw it, you can. I'm like, oh, God, withdraw it? God, no. 3 days later, she sent me an email saying, I love this book, I have to have it. It's like, oh my God, that's amazing, how easy that was. Why wasn't it easy before, you know? And I don't really know the answer. But she sold the book within 3 months to a standard publisher, and that's who I have been with. And with regard to the straitjacket of the editor, once you sign that contract, it's their book. You don't have control over it anymore. You don't have control of the title or the cover or what it's going to look like inside. They don't ask you what font you like. They don't ask you what little doohickey you like between sections. It's their book. And if they want you to change a paragraph, move a chapter, eliminate a chapter, take out all the polemics and the politics, and you want them to publish your book, you can argue, but the clause in the contract says they can withdraw the contract. So remember that when you're deciding how you want to go with publishing your book. Because, yeah, it's great. You have a standard publisher, they're going to do all of the work, they're going to put the book out there, and you will still have to market it regardless. You will still have work to do. But they own your book, and I think it's important to remember.
I'm going to move us on because we have very little time.
Oh, sorry.
And there's going to be a lot more, I think, about editing and agents and publishers that you can pick up at this conference. I want to ask one more question, and I want a very fast answer from each person, a 1 or 2 sentence answer, and then open it up for questions. What are the most important, or what is the most important lesson that you've learned about how to get started and how to actually finish a book, and what would you do or not do with it? Paul?
Well, as far as finishing the book, this is where we get, when you get to the end, stop. I think all of us would have the experience that even after the book was published, you could open the book and, well, I could have done this better. So at a certain point, and it's, of course, it's so tedious working with the 350-page manuscript, reviewing it again and again and again. The editing process is a tedious process. So are you finished after 11 rewrites and re-edits? Nobody knows. You just, at some point you say, okay, this has to go out in the mail now. This has to be submitted now. There's a point where you just have to feel comfortable. But that doesn't mean that you're going to stop editing that manuscript until the bottom line is finished.
Your biggest lesson from your experience?
It takes longer than you think it will. That's the biggest lesson. So you write it. Oh my God, I wrote it, it's done. No. 3 weeks go by, you start looking at it again. You revise it. You get through that, you think, I'm done. No. Something grips you when you edit it. Then, because you're a glutton for punishment, you show it to people. They workshop it for you. They critique it. You change it. You edit it. You send it out to beta readers. And God bless these people, they do it for free. And they will give you a full critique on your book. You change it. You edit it. At some point, you just hate it. When you hate it, that's time to stop. Don't do another thing. That's how you know you're done. And if it gets accepted for publishing, or if you start to publish it, you will go through some of these steps all over again. Okay?
Right. I'll just add a personal note. I, for many years, was a journalist writing day-to-day. I've written books, and my position is that every writer needs an editor. I happen to be a book editor now, but the point is that when you are through with it, you have got to get it to somebody else before you try to market it. Other questions? Open for questions.
So,
Roberta.
so what is a beta reader and how do you find these
A
people?
beta reader, so I'm glad they're not called alpha readers, because sometimes they feel like that. A beta reader is someone, generally you make an exchange. So first of all, I recommend that you join some kind of writing group, either online or in person, so that you can exchange your work on a regular basis. I think that feedback is really important as you're developing, and it's so lonely to be a writer. I don't write where there are people because I can't stand noise. So for me, it's many hours by myself with all this stuff. So I really need an outside community. So any person who is a writer, who is in your writing community, you can ask to be a beta reader of your work.
And that's different than workshopping your book?
Workshops are generally done in sections, so a chapter or 10 pages.
Okay, yeah.
So you get a really deep dive on those 3,000 words, but a beta reader is committing to read the entire manuscript and to give you feedback on the entire narrative arc, on the character development, on the pacing of the book, on the experience of the book, whether it was worth it to them to read it or not, what they got out of it. So it's like putting it out in the world, but with fewer repercussions for your ego.
But on that topic of writers groups, a lot of people have been asking about it. So we have put a sign-up sheet.
Yeah.
Was that announced?
No.
Okay.
Yes, do it.
If you were coming in the front door, the last table right by the door is a sign-up sheet. If you're looking for a writers group, you're not alone at this conference. There are a bunch of you. Put your name and your email, and you'll be in a position then to be contacted to see if you want to form your own group. Another question? Yes?
Yeah, Jenny, you mentioned that you also had several short stories and other things that you also worked on. In my situation, I have a novelette manuscript, and I also have several short stories that are kind of in the same genre and theme. And it just dawned on me sitting in this meeting here, is there a way to combine all that into one larger book and make a novel out of it?
Maybe. If the subjects, if you have characters that are the same from story to story. So if you think of, is it Elizabeth Strout, Olive Kitteridge is a novel told in short stories. Take a look at that and see if what you've been writing sort of matches the way that you've put that together. A couple of people have done that. I've got a novella like that out there looking for a publisher. I think it's a good way to do it because readers don't read the way they did. They don't sit down for 6 hours with a book. They have 15 minutes to read, they'll pick it up. So if you're doing it in these short chunks, that might be very readable. But there has to be some common theme.
Have something that ties,
Something that ties it all
either a
together.
timeline or something.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Another question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jenny, your story, you said, so that didn't work, so I put that book on the shelf. I'm wondering if, three things, I'm wondering, if are those books still on the shelf, or did you publish them? Number two, when you had the agent and the publisher, was that a successful venture? And number three, if you had all to do it again, how would you do? I mean, you
I would
learned.
get a fairy godmother. I think, so I think if you want the widest possible distribution, you want to try, if you really think you have a blockbuster, I think I would give myself the shot at the agent and the big 500. Start there, because really, all you're going to get is no. And surprisingly, the world does not die when you get no. So you just have to learn how to live with that thing that's called rejection. Start at the top. Go, like if you have a short story you want to publish, go right to the New Yorker. Why? Why not? They'll just not pay attention to you. After 6 months or so, you'll get it. You'll go to the next guy down on your list. Make lists. Make lists of who you want to publish your book. Make lists of agents you think would represent you. Not 5, 400. Make lists, big, long lists, and go through your list diligently. Like, this is going to save your life. You will find somebody eventually.
There's a very key point about whether you do the agent traditional publisher and go for the top, or whether you're doing self-publishing. And that's time. If you feel it's urgent, if you feel you need to get it out there, looking for the agent or the publisher is not the way to do it. There are stories of people who do self-publishing who get out there, they fill their trunk of their car with their books, and they go around the country, and they get a lot of attention, and a traditional publisher picks it up. But as I tell my clients, if you want a traditional publisher, a traditional agent, by the way, an agent is as hard or harder to get these days than a publisher. You've got to be prepared to take that time, and you may be talking 6 months each time you send. You can send multiple queries, but you need to tell them you're doing that. In other words, you can write to 3 different publishers and say, I'm submitting it at the same time to others. But it will be a waiting game, and we have to figure out how much patience we've got. Other question?
I have a question for you, Ginny. You mentioned you had 5 children and a full-time job, you worked as a journalist. I also actually work as a reporter myself now. I've been doing that for the last 5 years, and I'm trying to figure out time management to work on my own writing. And how did you do that when you were raising?
Middle of the night, mostly. Yeah, and cheating at work. It's because there's lunch hours and other people take cigarette breaks. Why can't I take a word break?
Paul also has been writing with full-time jobs. How have you done it?
Yeah, well, years and years of a couple hours a night after work, 6 days a week, like that. This is what it takes.
One more question, and we're going to respect the time limitations. Yeah.
Well, for your books about the immigration and the courts and everything, you had that inside knowledge, but then also, that's a big topic that is very, I think more and more people are being interested in knowing what is going on. So did you find experts to help you? Like, did you submit to other people?
He's the expert.
I know you're an expert, but how do you, I didn't mean you weren't an expert, but additional, like, did you get support to make sure that you're really presenting it well?
Well, again, primarily, like Ellen said, taking the long slog of going to the traditional houses and agents, and as that dwindled, going to more independent houses. But, there are, of course, well, the book is very well reviewed by experts in the community, but other than that, other than just an informal, no.
But when you had your manuscript complete, Paul, Did you show it to another judge, a couple of other lawyers or anything, or did you just go with it?
No, I just went with it.
Thank you, everybody. I know Ginny and Paul will actually